use and getting around on public transport. And I'd just like to say a few things about our chair, who's Dr. Hulya Gilbert, who is a lecturer in urban planning, city planning at the UNSW here in Sydney. Hulya comes with many years of experience working in this area. Her PhD on child-friendly cities and its importance, its central role in transition to more sustainable transport, won an award when it was submitted, and she's published plenty of work from that over the years. In recent years, her focus on child-friendliness extends to equity more generally in transport, issues of road safety, and how we might recalibrate our transport system, our transport mindsets to make cities and mobility safe, accessible, pleasant for and sustainable for all of us. And her particular focus with today's panel is continuing something that was started at the Australasian Transport Research Forum conference in 2024, where Hulya convened a youth panel at that conference. It was a bit of an innovation for the conference, and it was very well received at the time. And so now this has been moved online, and we've got twice the number of panelists. So before I hand you over to Hulya herself, I'd just like to say to those of you who are here in the audience, please ask your questions in the chat. Of course, we'd love to answer your questions, or as many as we can. We'll leave that until the end of the session. And of course, today's session is being recorded. So if you have any privacy issues, best not to participate in any way in which will allow you to be identified. But having done that now, I'll pass you on to Hulya.
Thanks very much, Ian. Lovely introduction, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here. Super excited to be here, continuing to elevate the voices of some incredibly bright young people we have on the panel. There are many, many reasons why listening to children and young people is necessary and important. Before we start, I would like to quickly go through some of these reasons. Firstly, as transport researchers, we often, if not all the time, talk about future cities and a better future for all, right? We can't seriously have those conversations about transport and future ways of living without the members of the future generation in the room. So it is simply not right, and it just falls short of our values and beliefs around equity as researchers. Secondly, we all know about the link between transport and climate change. As a transport, one of the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, the third at the moment, I believe, since children and young people have the most at stake from climate change, we can't really afford to not have their voices in these discussions. Another reason is the participation of children and young people in these conversations is fundamentally a human rights issue. Australia, as a signatory to the Convention on the Rights of the Child Treaty by the United Nations, is committed to honoring such rights by acknowledging children and young people as equal citizens. So having them on panels like this is a critical way of honoring that commitment. Finally, public transport and young people represent a really interesting and crucial intersection. They are actually one of the most frequent users of public transport, yet they are often left out of transport decision-making processes. So the panel like today's directly contributes to addressing this gap by listening to young people's lived experiences. So with this, it's really my privilege to introduce our wonderful panelists who are already actively engaging with these topics. So we've got four amazing young people with us today. So I would like to start with Poppy's bio. Poppy's 17 years old and currently in year 12 at a co-ed public high school. She has consistently caught public transport to and from school since year 4. Her journey with public transport started when she was quite young, and over time she has become very familiar with the systems around Sydney She's an avid user of the metro and train replacement buses, where the metro is not yet finished. She really appreciates how extensive Sydney's transport network is, and she looks forward to the metro's completion, hopefully for her high school graduation. Poppy, welcome, and can you give us a wave, then everybody can see you? Our second panelist is Jethro. Jethro is a year 11 student who's been passionate about public transport since the age of 2, with a recent focus on equitable planning and design solutions for modern cities. He is a high-achieving geography student with a strong interest in political and urban geography, recognized with multiple high school awards, including the prize for elective geography in 2024 and 2025. Jethro has completed several independent projects, including a study of his local bus network and a researched newspaper article titled, "Can Public Transport Really Deliver Improvements to Human Well-Being? Insights from the Netherlands." In 2025, he undertook a university-level primary research report titled, "How Do Young People Feel About Urban Places?" He's actively engaged with Transport for New South Wales, having represented youth at a Roads Act 1993 review stakeholder roundtable and invited to do a work experience with the chief transport planner. Jethro, show us your face. Jacob is an 18-year-old advocate. Jacob's our third panelist, and some of you might remember Jacob from the ATRF Youth panel a couple of years ago. He is the Ballarat Young Citizen for 2024. Jacob is currently studying at the Australian National University in Canberra, doing a double degree in political science and public policy. Jacob has a plethora of experience in increasing quality of life for young people in many areas, including transport, where he has worked with Infrastructure Victoria, the City of Ballarat, and other organizations to improve access, especially in regional Victoria. Welcome, Jacob. And our final panelist is again known to some of you here, is Tom. He's a 19-year-old transport and climate activist who has worked across many community organizations and advocacy groups during his teenage years. Tom was a member of the Durban Youth Jury Advisory Board between 2021 and 2025, as well as delivering speeches discussing the need for improved mobility options for young people at both Parliament House and the State Library. In 2024, he was awarded a special commendation for his efforts in the category of Young Citizen of the Year at the Durban Community Awards. He is currently studying an arts degree at the University of Melbourne, majoring in politics and geography, as well as taking urban planning related subjects. Welcome, Tom. So obviously, there is no doubt that our panelists are already doing incredible things, already thinking deeply about transport, equity, and future. I'd love to start grounding this conversation with in your day-to-day lives, our panelists, lovely panelists. I want to start asking you how you move around, right? And tell us a bit more about how public transport fits into your everyday routines. So we might start with Jethro and Poppy, and then Jacob and Tom.
So for me, I use a train mostly to get around. I live in suburbia, so a lot of the time I have to get driven rather to the train station. But I do walk from time to time. I go to school about an hour away in total, and I take the train like every day. And I love to walk, so where I can, I walk to and from the train station, or I walk to nearby suburbs. But generally, I need to like be driven around a little bit and then take lots of public transport after that.
How about you, Poppy?
Um, I would say I start school very early in the mornings, and I catch two buses because my train line is down due to the metro. So my journey roughly takes about 50 minutes to get to school when it's like a 20-minute drive, which I've got to say is a bit frustrating. I generally I'm in walking distance of like 3 bus stops that go all around Sydney, as well as like the train replacement buses. So I never drive. My parents are like really against like driving me places. There's always a bus that I can catch anywhere.
Thanks, Poppy. How about you, Jacob?
So prior to moving to Canberra about a year and a half ago, I used public transport a lot, especially out in Ballarat where I'm from, to and from school, and around town a fair bit. Since then, I have gotten my license, and for a multitude of different reasons, I mostly drive around to places where I can. I think that's a representation of Canberra as a city more than anything else. But I have used the public buses around here a fair bit as well. There are definitely some good parts to the public transport network here in Canberra. But I would say that at the moment, given my needs with my work and just my daily life, public transport doesn't fully fit into that, unfortunately. So I
Hmm.
do mostly use a car for day-to-day things.
Yep. Thanks, Jacob. And Tom.
Hey guys. I mean, for me, I'm quite lucky in that I attend Melbourne Uni. I'm in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, and so I'm mainly able to take public transport there, whether that's catching the train into the city and then the metro tunnel, or the train and then a bus up Johnston Street. So I'm quite lucky in that regard that I am close to a train station, and so most of my like travel to and from uni is facilitated through that. I also sometimes ride my bike to uni. But sadly, my nice bike got stolen a few months ago, so I haven't got around to purchasing a new bike. So most of my transport's been done on public transport. Again, like Jacob, I also got my driver's license at the end of 2024 when I turned 18, and so some of my like mobility choices have been changed by that. And in some ways, I feel like, particularly because of the convenience barrier sometimes in using public transport, whether that be frequency or simply I don't have the time. Sometimes I've slipped into bad habits of driving, but I still try and maintain using public transport as much as I can. It's my primary way of getting to uni, and also getting home after nights out, etc., things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, having moved from Melbourne Uni to UNSW, I really miss that public transport connectivity at Melbourne University. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your daily experiences with public transport. I want you to now focus on the challenges, right? So we ask, as researchers, ask this question all the time to our research participants about the biggest barriers they face. I want to see your perspective. Like, what is it for you that makes a really big difference when you are making a decision about whether to use public transport or not? Is it cost? Is it accessibility, proximity, safety, or all of the above? So yeah, let's start with Jethro again. What are the biggest challenges in terms of public transport?
I mean, for me personally, I think I got to recognize that I'm pretty lucky to be able to walk to the train station and get on a train that shows up most of the time. But I think the biggest challenge for me is the frequency of the train. So during the peak hour, it's great, you can get to work, and during the off peak, it's not too bad. It's about 4 an hour. But then you get to weekends where you want to go out with friends or you want to go out with the family, and the train's every 30 minutes, and I'm just so restricted by when I can go out and how I can get around because I just have to always work to this strict 30-minute timetable. And then, one gets cancelled or one gets delayed, and I'm stuck in the city for an hour. I just can't get out. And I think the other thing for me is even though I do get to walk, I'm an able-bodied young person. I can easily get to the train station, but it's dark and it's very dark at night. There's not footpaths the entire way, and it's quite hilly. And if I was, not as privileged as I am, then I think accessibility to the train station would be really difficult, and that would be a really big barrier to people trying to access public transport, particularly young people or people, not
Mm.
the people that are always considered.
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah. Great. Thank you, Jethro. Poppy, how about you?
I completely agree with Jethro in terms of frequency. I work in the city after most school nights, so I'm finishing working at like 9 o'clock at night, and I have to stand on a dark street for 20 minutes before the next bus comes to take me home. So I
Mm.
definitely think that's one of the biggest problems I have. But on top of that, I would also say reliability of mainly buses, especially within Sydney. I find that a lot of like buses will either be like running 20 minutes late or it doesn't show up, or like it's very unreliable on whether you actually know if your bus is going to show up. Especially like you have like the apps that tell you when they're going to come, but
Hmm.
I don't trust them anymore because I've just had so many buses just not show up and I'm just standing at the bus stop for another hour till the next one comes. And it's just very
Hmm.
frustrating to just have to like wait because this isn't reliable.
Hmm. And of course, we know that different genders have different experiences as well. So does it make a really huge difference for you?
I think for me, yes. I definitely have more anxiety about like
Mm,
waiting for public transport, especially like in the darker months,
yeah.
because it's just like a known fact. But I I've like seen myself in a few situations on public transport where I'm like, I don't like this. I think I might get off the bus. But
Mm,
the frequency of those over the course of a year is like very small. So I think it's not a massive issue, but
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks. Jacob, yeah. But then there's also a specific question for you in the chat as well. So is there anything that you missed from your public transport journeys that you don't experience as a young driver? Maybe we
I,
can start with that one. Mm,
yeah, of course. So I guess the main difference, it's hard for me to sort of draw a lot of comparison because I pretty much got my license and moved straight to Canberra all in the same sort of time frame. So I didn't get a lot of time to really see the difference. I will say where I'm from in Ballarat, it's not a very walkable city. Ballarat is very the way, like urban planning wise, I think there were choices that were made that didn't necessarily put walkability and accessibility front of mind. And so that was a very big constraint in terms of catching public transport to begin with. And then
mm-hmm,
to link that in a little bit as well with sort of the main question about the challenges was that there was a lot of issues regarding the actual amount of buses and the bus services that existed out in regional. So for us, even trying to catch a bus to school in the morning, like peak hour, 8:20 a.m., I was trying to catch a bus. There was one service that would get me to school remotely on time, and that was a public bus that got other
mm,
people to where they needed to get to as well. And so you can imagine the constraints on the system in that regard. There were times where the bus would have to just drive past because there wasn't enough room to fit another person on. And there were
mm-hmm,
safety concerns around the board in terms of how many people can you fit on a bus. Um, so there was definitely a lot of constraint in that space. And I think that as a young driver, I don't have to worry about those concerns. I think whilst I had the regular concerns as a regular public transport user of the frequency, and efficiency of the system, there was also a worry as well of even if the bus is on time and it does get me where I need to get to on time, is there actually going to be room for me on the bus? Is it going to be comfortable to be on the bus because it can potentially be so busy that you might have to
mm,
stand or it can get really uncomfortable in those spaces as well. So I think to sort of answer both questions in one, that is sort of the biggest challenge. And as a young driver, I've noticed that efficiency and sort of just the ease of access that a car allows you. I think looking at a city like Canberra, that's very like everyone will have their own opinions about it, but from a personal perspective, it's very sparse in terms of it's very sort of spread out here in Canberra. And so bus lines can take a while to get from one point to another. And so being able to hop on the roads that have been very carefully planned, the roads here are really good. Um, it means that I can be confident. I know when I'm going to get somewhere, how long it's going to take me. And I've got that more peace of mind in that space. So yeah.
thanks. Thanks, Jacob. Tom, you already mentioned that you live in a very transport-rich area, but are there any specific challenges that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I concur with everything that's been said before, whether that be, I don't know, frequency is one big thing, particularly with buses. I mean, in my area, it's quite easy to go north-south because there's tram lines not too far away, there's a train line. But for example, if I wanted to go over to Sydney Road or Lygon, I kind of envision Melbourne. in these kind of columns of transport, right? You've got kind of like your Sydney Road corridor, your Lygon Street, your High Street, etc. And I live along the High Street corridor, but for example, if I want to go out with my friends who live over in Brunswick or Coburg, it's actually quite a hassle to get there on public transport, especially say I get off work and I need to get there relatively quickly. You could either pay and get an Uber or something, which is very convenient, or you could get the 561 bus, which runs every 40 minutes, which is extremely inconvenient. And that's quite a struggle. As well, yeah, perception of safety. I remember one thing related to the question before about things I've noticed now as a young driver is that I feel like it's easy to lose perspective on what it's like when you don't have your driver's license, for example. And when these decisions about, okay, how are we going to do frequency, routes, infrastructure, et cetera, are being made by people who have the option to drive, it's easy to neglect the people who don't have that option, which is essentially every single person under the age of 18. And I know that for me, when I was younger, being able to use my bike was so important to have mobility and have independence as a young person. Um, and so it's quite easy to lose that perspective when you do start driving and when you're not aware of what it's like to not have a license. So, for
Mm.
example, when I didn't have my license, if I wanted to go to one of my basketball matches, the only option I had was to ride my bike because my parents wouldn't give me a lift and there was no one else in my area who could drive me that direction. And it's like, okay, it's all well and good, to have X, Y, and Z in place, but when you're a young person, how are we making sure that we're even people who aren't young people but who don't have access to driving for one reason or another, are we providing infrastructure that allows everyone in society to have equal mobility opportunities and not just prioritizing those who are able to drive and coming at
Mm.
it from the perspective of someone who is able to drive? Because I know for me, it is extremely convenient. Sometimes I'm just like, okay, I need to be here quickly. What am I going to do? I'm going to hop in the car. But I know that, for example, like Jethro, Poppy, you don't have those options. I'm not sure. Oh, in New South Wales, you can get your license at 17, but you don't have those options necessarily. And we need to be ensuring that our infrastructure caters for those people as well. And yeah, making sure that we don't lose perspective as people who have our driver's license for people who don't. I think that's really
Mm.
important.
Yeah, I was going to have a question about the driver's license as well, because it is kind of like a very normalized pathways. Like I said, it's an expectations, right, from young people, but we've been seeing some different trends as well. So like we heard from Tom and Jacob about that, but I would love to hear from Jethro and Poppy. Uh, how do you feel about driver's license? And then as a general question, does the current fuel crisis have any bearing on that? Does it change your mind about how you see yourself as a driver?
I mean, it's exactly as you said, like it's so normalized among people my age and people growing up that, you got to get your license. For me, like when I entered year 10, all of a sudden everyone was talking about getting their license and doing their DKT, and many of my friends were like doing it the moment they could and then actually spending their birthdays at Service New South Wales centers. And I get it. It's a thing of independence and a thing of like, being able to move around, and that's totally fine. But like for me personally, for the last couple of years, I've been trying really hard to use my car less or getting driven around less. Because like I said, I really enjoy walking and I just enjoy being on public transit personally. So it's not a big deal. I Every month I do a week called I volunteer to do a week called Car Free Week, where I make myself not get driven around and walk as much as I can. So I walk to and from the train station. I get around, and for me, it's nice because don't use a car. It's cheaper. I get to be out in
Hmm.
nature, get some activity in. Um, but actually, by coincidence, just last week I finished my license test. I've actually just picked it up recently, and I haven't yet driven, but it's like it's not a big thing to me at my age. It's just like I just got the license more because it feels like a need if I'm living in suburbia and it's a very common form of ID that's used. So I feel like it's something I should do even if I don't have a
Hmm.
hugely practical need immediately for it, you know?
Hmm. Absolutely. Thanks, Jethro. Poppy, do you have anything to add?
For me,
Mm.
I would say driving is not really a necessity and more a skill. Um, because you can use driving much later in life. Like personally, I don't plan to own a car for like the next 10 years, especially if I stay in Sydney, because it's not financially possible. It's really difficult to own a car. Like I have a few friends who own cars and insurance costs and fuel costs, they just buy back their car every year. And I'm like, that's not sustainable. I have my license. I got my license, my learner's license last year. And I've done about maybe 50 hours in the span of a year purely because my parents don't drive anywhere, so I don't have the opportunity to drive much places. Um, in terms of like fuel and my perspective on that, I have the privilege, my family owns an electric car, so I haven't really thought too deeply about that in terms of like, does that affect whether or not I'll go driving or whether or not we like drive places. Um, but I do think that has been like a significant like balance and like a restriction, that's the word, from stopping people from driving places these days, especially with like cost. It's not affordable currently.
Mm. The the current debate about free public transport. So Victoria has done it. Everybody's waiting for New South Wales to do it. How do you feel about that? So you guys are already very frequent users of public transport, and you already mentioned the cost, but do you think it's going to make a big difference in the lives of the majority?
Do you
Poppy
want any
or
of us to
Joy?
step in
Yeah.
or oh
Poppy, while we're on you, yeah, you can say, do you think
Um,
that?
I think
Do you know many people who struggle with the cost of public
yeah,
transport, for example?
I have
Yeah.
a lot of people who have to pay for their own Opal card, and
Mm,
seeing this like this cost of public transport like limits your ability to move around and your ability to be social, especially with
mm,
like school areas. I have a few friends who don't quite make the cut for a school Opal card, which like heightens the risk of getting on a bus and not wanting to tap on because you don't want to pay that fee, and then
mm,
a public transport checker coming onto your bus and like, why didn't you tap on? And now you have to pay this like $40 fee or something like that.
mm,
I think the like, I think cost does limit it, and I do think if you take that factor away, you would have more people using your systems.
mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
how that would affect frequency, like we've talked about before, whether they would increase it because you would expect
Mm,
more people to use this, would be like another question that I think would arise with making the cost of public transport free.
absolutely. It might create some other problems that, yeah, we are not facing right now that we need to think about. It's not that simple, right? Yeah, great. Anyone else would like to add to that debate?
it's
Cost
definitely
debate?
gotten a lot busier on off-peak transport.
Mm,
A lot of my lectures are either like, oh, sorry, not lectures, my tutorials are either at 10 or 11 a.m. And I got on the train yesterday, I think at like 10 something, 10:27 maybe,
mm,
expecting to get a seat. And I think I ended up having to sit on the floor or something like that, because I couldn't find a seat on the train. I think it's great. I think particularly at the moment, it's a good way of shifting people onto public transport.
mm,
In the long term, is it sustainable? Really comes down to how many services we can offer. For example, at Reservoir Station, anytime it's off peak, it's a 20-minute frequency, which is, in
mm.
my opinion, just not good enough. It should be at least 15 minutes, like with like 4 trains an hour minimum,
Yeah.
during off peak, and then particularly, even after big events, it's like a half an hour frequency after 8 p.m. or something on my line, and that's just not good enough when you're in the city and it's like, okay, how am I planning to get home from my night out? So yeah, I think, yeah, one thing as well, I think that there should be more flexibility around short trip fares, for example. I think like in Melbourne, we're quite lucky. We have, if you're on a concession card, it's like $5 something all day cap, which I think is quite generous. But if you're on a full fare ticket, say you're an international student and you're not eligible for a concession ticket, and you want to take a short trip, it adds up quite quickly. So I feel like there should
Mm,
be more done around short trip fares, and maybe lower fares. But I think like our daily cap in Melbourne, if you're on a concession, I think is quite generous. I
mm.
think it's quite good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I heard that from many of my students as well. Yeah, great. Jacob, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think mostly just sort of reiterating a little bit of what Tom said and just touching on a little bit more in terms of I think that it's a great initiative. I think, however, it needs to be paired with better services at the end of the day. Like I know what I remember the Ballarat line from Ballarat to Melbourne in terms of the V line train. They when they were sort of doing a lot of renovations on the line and trying to double the tracks and all that sort of stuff. They had made transport during that time free for a limited time because of the disruptions and so forth. And the spike in the number of users that opted to use public transport just during that time that maybe usually would have driven for whatever other reason. That was definitely quite noticeable as someone who used that line a fair bit. Um, and it made for a really uncomfortable experience, especially on a train, having to stand like a fairly long distance, hour and a half-ish journey, having to stand for that. Especially in a carriage that isn't designed for any level of standing, made it really uncomfortable. So I think that whilst it's a great initiative, I think that it needs to come with better planning as well.
Absolutely. Well said, Jacob. Just a reminder to our audience. So if you have any questions, please just feel free to share them in the Q&A tab. I'm not sure if the chat function is working as well, so that's another option. But I know the Q&A function is definitely working. So we're gonna get through your questions towards the end. So I've got a few more questions for our panelists, and then we're gonna have an open room discussion. Thank you all for sharing those insights. I would like you to now shift your gaze towards the future, right? So I want you to tell us about how you envision yourself using public transport or other modes in the next 10 years. So some of you already mentioned, I think Poppy was saying, I don't want to have a car next 10 years. So can you tell us more about those future thinking? So Poppy, do you have anything to add to that? What are the reasons you see? What are the factors that might contribute to the change in your main transport mode?
I I plan on attending uni in Sydney. I want to go to UNSW, but if I do that, I think I would reiterate my statement. I don't want to own a car purely because we do have these public transport in Sydney systems in Sydney, as well as like share bikes and all those other like systems that you can use. So I in 10 years, I probably, if I am still living in Sydney, I like do plan to use these systems. Like the metro being built is going to be something that like exponentially like probably would increase the amount of people using public transport because it's something that would it's much quicker than say driving. Like you can get across Sydney in like the span of maybe 30-20 minutes. And I think that's something that will be really helpful to a lot of people, especially me. But yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Poppy. Jethro, how do you see yourself in the next 10 years?
I mean, hopefully I can keep to lots of walking, public transport, and some more like cycling, like Poppy said. Rideshare seems to be a pretty good option nowadays. I mean, with the cost of housing, it doesn't look like I'll be leaving where I am anytime soon, but hopefully, like there's more options in suburbia to get around that isn't just driving and like driving two stations kind of thing, like a little bit more micro mobility and those kinds of services that can support people in areas that don't have as good last mile connections. So hopefully I can just not need to buy a car because as Poppy said earlier, it's so expensive and like I can't imagine if I were to study at, Sydney or New South Wales University, like the parking there and driving there, it just seems absurd when we have these systems already. So I really hope that there's enough now and there's enough progress in the future that I can keep traveling without a car and still maintain like being on time and not wasting too much time on transit, you know?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jethro. Jacob, I guess the answer will depend on where you live, whether you stay in Canberra or go back to Ballarat. But how do you see yourself in the next 10 years?
I think personally, I would love to go overseas and do some study overseas, but I think it really answers this question a little bit in the sense of I've done a lot of travel myself, and when I look at some of the countries that I've been to in sort of Southeast Asia, and the wider Asian sort of region, and looking at their sort of connectivity and the ways of life and the way they've sort of been able to integrate public transport in such a way into their lives where it's become almost the norm. I think of countries like Singapore, for example. I understand that their the way they operate is so much different to us in terms of the size and all that sort of stuff. And they're what, a quarter of the ACT in terms of size. So of course the way they're able to connect people via public transport is a lot easier. But I think when I look at systems like that, where I've experienced firsthand that those systems are clean, they're on time, they're not too expensive, they're built into everyday life. Countries like Singapore have malls attached to their train stations. No one lives more than like a 5-minute walk away from a train station. The connectivity is insane. And when I look at somewhere like that, it looks very inviting and very, whilst there are other factors at play, I think it makes me think more about how I would love to live car free and live somewhere that has that as the norm and caters to people like that. I think that looking forward to me staying in Australia, let's just say in Canberra as an example, for those of you who don't know, Canberra has a light rail and a bus network. Currently trying to expand the light rail. Currently the light rail goes from the city centre up north. They want to extend it down south. The thing with that, however, is that it's taken an extremely long time. The connectivity still, there's no guarantee as to where it's actually going to finish. There's a lot of uncertainty around, well, if this is what services look like now, what will they look like in 5 years, 10 years time? What is this going to replace? What are we going to look like? So I think the uncertainty is definitely a negative in terms of a forward-looking approach. And I struggle to see living most places in Australia, whether it be Melbourne, Canberra, regional again. I do sort of struggle to see an outlook where I'm not car dependent for the most part, or at least prefer to use my car in most situations.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very similar to my own experience to Jacob, just consciously selling my car a few years ago and how it informs my decision where to live, but it creates some new challenges. That's great. How about you, Tom? Anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I am kind of entering a stage in my life where I'm thinking about, oh, do I want to move out? What are my next stages in terms of where I want to live? Because my current house is
Mm,
quite small. I don't have much of my own
mm,
space. And I would love to live somewhere that I can just hop on my bike and my entire life is just on my bike because it brings me so much joy. And one thing I wanted to touch on earlier, just a quick point I wanted to make is like as a young person, I think that riding my bike around was so important for giving me an appreciation for the spaces around me and for my community and for what was good infrastructure and what was bad infrastructure. That's just one point I wanted to make earlier, particularly for young people growing up. But for me, at this stage of my life, I would love to live somewhere like Brunswick, Carlton, blah, blah, blah. All of those inner north suburbs I absolutely adore. The only issue is that, yeah, as Jacob said, there's a strong correlation between the most expensive locations in Melbourne and places with good walkability and good infrastructure, particularly when it comes to finding a good rental, for example. So one thing that I would really love to see is that we work to make our kind of middle and outer middle suburbs, like your reservoirs and your Coburgs, a lot more friendly towards cyclists. Whether that be changes to speed limits, more protected bike lanes, etc. Also, I know like the state government's plan around densifying around train stations. I'm really for that. I think that's really important because we need to be supplying housing around public transport. And so I'm really like I would love to live in a place where I can easily get around on public transport on my bike, etc. But I am also just conscious of the cost of that. Look, I'm confident that I'll be able to find a way to incorporate that into my life somehow. But I really, yeah, I want to see an effort made on the legislative side of things and the policy side of things that enables young people to live like that in the future and to make sure that they aren't just priced out of areas which support them to live independent of cars. I think that's really important. I think that we should be heavily, heavily focusing on that.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I was going to ask you guys a question about technology, and I'm reminded of that by Patrick and the Q&A function as well. So technology and public transport. So I want to hear from you about how well certain technologies support your public transport journeys? Are they working, not working for you? What sort of applications do you rely on? Like, where does technology fit in your decision-making processes and daily experiences of public transport? And we can start with Jethro, perhaps.
I mean, I think for me, in Sydney, I'm an avid religious user of TripView. It's very
Mm-hmm.
helpful. It tells me it tells me sorry when I need to be there and when I can get my train. It's great at showing me all my options, and it genuinely has been like part of me being able to understand transport the way I do, being able to see very clearly how it is. But it's also not great at necessarily wayfinding. It's a little bit better at telling you once you know your route where you're trying to go. I think for that, I'd probably lean on Google Maps, and a lot of people I know would probably lean on Google Maps for that in terms of wayfinding. I think technology's also been good in terms of like paying for transport. I mean, I'm not able to yet.
Mm,
They're talking about doing it soon, but I see a lot of people all the time tapping with their watches, with their phones. That seems like it could be really convenient when I get to the point where that's introduced. But I think on the wayfinding point, it almost feels like we've drifted too far into relying on digital tools for wayfinding. Like when you go into some stations nowadays, you look up at the like those direction boards, like and it's a 26, 27 here, 1 to 14 here, 25 airport down there, and it's like really confusing. And for me, like of course I've grown up here, it's not too bad, but I feel like for young people who just might be taking transport occasionally, that's very daunting. Or even if you think about tourists or people who don't speak English or other groups, then I think we should be considering that there's another place for technology in terms of like using it
mm,
for wayfinding, but also not over relying on it. Particularly when, you have times where, like, even just the other day, I was coming home and there's a real-time outage and I can't see when any of the trains are. That feels like we can't fully replace the needs for technology just yet.
yeah, absolutely. Because yeah, it is a very interesting space, and you're right. So we've been relying on that on so many levels, and for your generation, I think there is some emerging research showing that there is a correlation between that technology use and then the decline of certain cognitive skills. So it would be really, really interesting to hear from others as well. So Poppy, how about you? What kind of relationship you have with technology when you're using public transport? And just reading the question from Patrick again, is there anything you guys would like to see changed in how we use the Internet of Things to travel? So any
Um,
general comments? Yeah.
I think something that I would like changed is so for wayfinding, I completely agree with Jethro. It's something I use Google Maps for, but I would gotta say for routes in terms of like maybe walking to places or even riding, I find this especially. Um, the routes are terrible. Like you're on main
Mm,
roads that are really loud and busy, and you have all these like quiet streets that you can navigate through where it's the same amount of time, but I find that these apps always default to um, what they think would be like the quickest route. And like you're
mm,
scrolling down all your options that you have, and then you see that like one's actually faster, it's just less direct. But I find they really push these like busy streets on you, which
mm,
I really don't like.
mm. Thanks, Poppy. Jacob.
Yeah, I think I might be like a little bit different from the other guys in the sense that I prefer to have everything sort of on my phone. The more sort of simplified and easier to sort of condense into one, I tend to lose everything and anything. So if I can keep it all on my phone, the better. So for me, again, like to draw a comparison, like I'm heading to Japan and some other countries in Asia, fairly soon, like China and a couple of places like that. And from my living room here, I can get a train pass. I can get I'm not sure what the exact term is, but like the cards that you use to get around for specific cities and that sort of stuff in my Apple Wallet, load it with cash and get it ready to go before I'm even over there. Even when I am over there, I can just tap my card and I can use it that way as well. Um, and I think that, there's places like when we talk about Singapore, for example, like Google Maps is very integrated into public transport in the sense that it'll tell you the specific door to exit out of to get to the specific spot that you're wanting to go to. I think personally, connectivity like that, where everything
Mm,
feels very streamlined, I don't think that that necessarily, I think two things can be true at once, that that should be accessible in terms of simplicity. And I personally think that technology should be very well intertwined with public transport. But I don't
Mhm.
think that that necessarily means that we should neglect the more analog ways of doing things, the maps that we have in train stations and all those other ways that people get around as well. I don't think that one should come at the expense of the other, but I think that in terms of when we look at technology, personally, the more integrated, the more likely I am to engage with it because to me it feels more, if it's more streamlined and easy to use and I don't have to Google the website and find the timetable and figure out what
Mm.
station I'm at, if I can just pop it into an app and it'll tell me where I have to go, how much it is, where I got to get off at. Like to me, that feels very simplistic, very easy. I don't have to think about it too much.
That's a really interesting one, Jacob, because I think about that all the time because I'm constantly like increasingly relying on my phone for shopping, for public transport and everything. But it's kind of started producing this small level of anxiety. What's gonna happen if I lose my phone or if I leave it behind? Do you get that kind of anxiety at all, or
I
you
think a
really?
little bit. Like there's
Mm,
obviously situations where you like, your phone might die or something like that. And I think that's why
mm,
I sort of say that I don't think that technology should trump the analog ways of doing things. I think
mm,
that that suits everyone can use analog ways of doing things, the maps, all that sort of stuff. And I don't think, as I said, they should come at the expense of one another.
mhm,
But I think that for those who have the capacity and the ability to navigate technology in a way where they're able to use those more streamlined services, I think they should be on offer. I
mm,
think that it would just make things a lot easier. I think when I think about driving around, and I use Google Maps, I know that Google Maps is literally going to take me to the doorstep of where I'm trying to go, or like the car park right next door. Um, so when I think about that level of connectivity, I sort of would almost expect that if I'm looking to replace my car with public transport, I would want that same level of ease where I can just sort of pop in where I want to go, and it's going to be able to sort of get me there
mm.
without having all these other additional steps.
Yeah,
And I know even here in Canberra, like Victoria doesn't have tap. I think they recently rolled it out, but at least when I was using Victorian public transport, that wasn't an option in terms of just tapping your card or having your Myki on your Apple Wallet. That was a big sort of downside for me.
hmm,
Personally, as I said, I'm a very big card like digital person. I couldn't tell you where my physical bank cards are if I tried. I haven't used them in years. Um, I so I think that's a ba not necessarily a barrier for a lot of young people, but I think it would be something that would allow a certain demographic of people, like including young people as well, that would allow greater connectivity, less sort of ambiguity and sort of stress around trying to navigate public transport as well, if it was more clearly streamlined and able to sort of be navigated from one or two apps, more condensed down in that space.
yeah. Thanks, Jacob. Tom, anything to add?
I mean, I don't have a huge amount to add. I feel like a lot of useful stuff
Mm,
has been said. For me, because I'm a bit of like a map nerd and whatever, I feel like I don't use technology that much for wayfinding, because I kind of like understand like the routes and the network and things like that kind of inside my head. I do use it mainly for checking things like arrival times and things like that, so I know actually when to be at the station. Which yeah, obviously I'd rather it turn up and go frequency, but yeah, that's the main thing I use it for. I feel like one area where it lacks sometimes is with bus routings. I feel like sometimes uh like a bus route could be useful, but it slips through the cracks in terms of Google Maps or Apple Maps picking it up as an option, whether that be due to frequency or some other reason. So yeah, mainly just like integrating train, bus, and tram, particularly in Melbourne,
mm,
to make sure that the most optimal route is being chosen. Because sometimes I look at it and a bit like, is that actually the best way of getting there? I feel like I could get there faster.
mm,
But yeah, that's the main thing. I feel like yeah, most of the other stuff's already been said. Also, sometimes I feel like we're leaning on technology a little bit too much. For example, at a lot of stations in Melbourne, they don't actually have the Myki fares laid out. You now have to scan a QR code to then see the Myki fares. So they're printing out a piece of paper that they could have just printed the fares on, but it's purely just for a QR code to then take you to the fares. I mean, yeah, that's good because if the fares change, they can update that
mm.
dynamically. But for people who don't have as much access to technology, I know that that could be a barrier, for example. Yeah,
Yeah,
whether that be
yeah.
young people, old people, etc. I know in my community, there's still a lot of people rolling around who would not be able know how to scan a QR code, and just having that information up immediately, for example, could be useful. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And building on your comment about the importance of integration between different modes, there is a question about the bike share schemes. If bike share schemes like Lime were better available across more councils, will this support young people for more of their trips? Poppy, do you have any thoughts on this?
I would say I live in an area in which I've never seen a Lime bike. Like where I go to school in more like Sydenham area, there are lots of Lime bikes there, especially close to train stations, I find. But inside the inner west, especially as you move more towards, I would say, Bankstown and that side, I rarely see share bikes. They're just not as frequent as you would find when you get closer to like the city and more populated, high density areas.
Absolutely. Jethro?
It's actually interesting. My friends at school have recently picked up their obsession with going line biking together, not going into the golf courses or anything, but just riding out for fun. And I learned how to ride a bike, and I really quite like it. But I also don't live in the area where there are line bikes, and I think it's interesting as a means of getting people out and being social, like my friends are doing. But I think that in terms of connectivity, it definitely has a role to play, and I think there's so much potential for us to be correctly placing these bikes and making them accessible to people. But I think a lot of it is we don't have the sufficient infrastructure. So maybe if you live in the city of Sydney or in inner west, you've got some bike lanes or some speed limits of 30 or 40. But if you go sort of anywhere further than that, it becomes quite dangerous. And for me, even the price of the line bikes is just a little high for like a short distance, right? Because the whole idea is that you're using it for that last mile connectivity or that short station to home or station to shops kind of distance. And I'm not really about paying like $3 or $4 when I could just walk it. Like I feel like there's got to be, well, I don't know if it's $3 or $4. I think it might be more than that. But I feel like if I can just walk it and save the cost, then maybe it's not worth it. But there is a place for it to, like, as me, as someone who can walk and likes to walk, it's great. But I feel like there's definitely a place for it to be used more widely, but it just has to be supported by infrastructure, supported by price, and not being, targeted by governments with speed limits as well, As that is a safety concern, of course, but
Yeah.
it's also got to be an approach that's for it being used more.
Thanks, Jethro. Jacob? Shared bikes.
Yeah, when we
and
talk
public
about
transport.
they only just introduced share bikes in Canberra like about a week ago, so I haven't actually used those yet. But in terms of the scooters, which I guess are pretty much the same thing for the most part, um, they have been a really great addition to my life personally. A lot of young people around sort of the ANU campus area. One thing about ANU being sort of adjacent to the city centre, a lot of the halls that do exist on campus, whilst I now live a lot closer to the city, where I was living previously on campus, is about a 40-minute walk to Canberra CBD and sort of like the main shopping centres in the city. And so, whilst that isn't necessarily unmanageable by any sort of means, I started a job in December, and one of the locations I had to work at was in the city, and it being like 25 degrees, wearing fully corporate pants and everything, having to walk like 40 minutes, just felt a bit like I was just nervous in terms of like that's a long walk in terms of I don't want to be all sweaty when I get to work or anything like that. So those scooters played a really big part for me there, where the parking was going to cost me $9 a day, or I could scooter there and back, which would cost me about $10 a day, but would get me there in about half the time because the traffic would have taken me at least twice as long. So I think pretty much what Jethro said is that I think there's a specific role that they do play. And I think that they do a really good job at playing that specific role. I think they have the capacity to do more. But I think that that comes with a lot more planning as well in terms of the capacity of the bikes, and the cost as well, I think is a big barrier too.
Yeah, the comfortability question is an interesting one. We'll get to that one because there's a specific question about that one. But Tom, anything to add quickly, perhaps?
Personally, I don't have any experience using a share bike service, mainly because I've always had a bike to use, and I've never been out in a situation where it's like, okay, let's all ride bikes now. But in terms of the concept of e-bikes, I'm all for them. I mean, obviously, I prefer to ride a normal bike because I enjoy the fitness aspect of it and I enjoy the mobility aspect of it. But I can see for a lot of people like how important e-bikes could be in terms of breaking down those barriers of convenience, those barriers of fitness, etc., and get them out of cars. I know there's been a lot of like negative reporting around e-bikes recently in the media. Particularly, for example, in Queensland, I'm not sure if they have or they're proposing banning them for people under the age of 16, and then like speed limiting them to 10 kilometers an hour in certain situations. And I just think that like if you compare like obviously, I don't think that a 14-year-old should be riding around on something that can go 100 kilometers an hour and is um,
Mm.
illegally modified. But I think that if you compare the amount of damage that e-bikes did compared to the amount of young people that were killed or hit by cars or had health impacts because they only drove around in cars, for example, I think that we should not be imposing all these restrictions on e-bikes, for example. And I
Mm.
really think that we should be like, look, obviously, in an ideal world, everyone rides a push bike because they're better for the environment, less materials, blah, blah, blah. They can be recycled much easier. A bike could last 50 years. But I think that anything that gets people out of cars is
Mm.
ultimately a good thing, and the environmental footprint of e-bikes is just so much less that I think that we really should be encouraging them, particularly for people who are apprehensive due to fitness, safety, blah blah blah, of riding a normal bike. I think that they're super important, and that we shouldn't be banning them for. I think a 17-year-old should be allowed to ride an e-bike, frankly. And another proposal was like making people get their learner license to be able to ride an e-bike, and I'm just like, we don't need to be adding all of these. Like contrived little barriers to getting people onto bikes.
Mm.
I just think that it's unnecessary, and like a step in the wrong direction personally. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
yeah, reducing restrictions is important.
absolutely. It's just making it safer without adding so many other
Yeah. Of
layers
course,
of
I'm talking about
restrictions.
yeah, legally
Yeah,
manufactured safe
yeah,
e-bikes,
absolutely.
not
No,
death traps, but
I
yeah.
get what you're saying. That's great. Yeah, there was a question about the comfort. We covered that already, and I'm conscious that Poppy has to leave at 3 o'clock for an appointment. But anyone else would like to add anything to the influence of comfort? Um, but I'm taking this question, Marlena, I don't know if you're still in the room, not only in terms of the comfort while you are using public transport vehicles, but getting there and then yeah, accessing your final destination after your last stop. So anyone would like to add anything, Poppy, before you leave us?
I think for me, comfort comes with do I have room to get on public transport?
Mm.
Especially since I'm a frequent catcher of the train replacement buses because I don't have that train that I used to catch so much. And in low peak times, these buses can get really, really full, and you're just having like it's it's uncomfortable to just stand up and to have like no room because everybody's trying to get on the same bus. I think that for me, that's where like comfortability comes in. But you could also see it in the sense of like, are you comfortable using the systems around Sydney? For me,
Yeah.
I think like I am, but I think that's because I've grown up a lot on using public transport. For someone new, like a lot of the friends that I met when I was younger were being driven to school every day and like they've never been like catching a bus by themselves. And I think really there should have been like more introduction to like maybe in primary school or something, like how to like safely catch public transport. And I think there should be really a lot of more education on like how these systems can help you like get around rather than just like assuming that cars are the only like mode of transport that like a lot of people see.
Yeah. Thanks, Poppy. But before you leave, I wanna just fast forward the final question for you because we're gonna go through some other questions, but you might miss them. If you had a magic wand, how would you use it in the context of public transport?
I personally, I would change like all our train systems within Sydney to metro systems purely because they go so much faster. they're like so much like cleaner in terms of like the way public transport like is, as
Mhm.
well as they're just so much better. Like I frequently catch the metro so much that like it changes your 30-minute trip on the train to like a 10-minute one. And I think that, and like the frequency of also that the metro services that we have currently are, I think they're just so good. And to see more of that, I think would be a really good like boost
Mm,
for public transport in Sydney.
wonderful. Thanks, Poppy. Jethro, anything to add to the discussion?
Yeah.
Before the magic wand question, so you feel free to answer that too. But
Oh,
anything
for
about the
the
comfortableness in
yeah, I
public
mean,
transport, accessing public transport. Yeah.
I totally agree with Poppy. I've also grown up taking a lot of public transport, and I think it's funny how we have Road Safety Day about learning how to not be killed by cars, but there's no sort of alternative to that. Like that's all we there's no like module about that in primary school or high school, is there? But for me, I think generally I'm quite tolerant to standing or whatever. It's not, I won't say I enjoy it. I spend a lot of my commute sitting down on the stairs or that kind of deal, but I think that there's definitely a factor of comfort towards bringing more people out of their cars and onto trains or onto buses. Like Poppy saying, when the buses are full, or when my commuting train is standing, or when I walk to the train station, just like Jacob was saying in Canberra, I walk up and down some hills and I get pretty sweaty, particularly in the summer months. It's 35 degrees. Like, I don't really want to be doing that. And I can imagine people who have the choice between driving and doing what I'm doing. It's like, I think it would be clear for them. And I think if we were to be addressing these solutions with, micromobility and better frequency and all these different things we've talked about, it would be a big step towards improving the culture and getting people out of cars and towards public transport generally, particularly in Sydney, but across Australia.
Yeah. Okay. How about magic wand? You have the magic wand for how would you
Oh,
use it?
I mean,
Just
if I've got a magic wand, maybe it's time for the high-speed rail all the way up and down the East Coast. But now, if I'm a little more realistic than that, I think
don't
um,
be realistic. You
the-
got the magic wand. Dream
I
big.
think in Sydney, I'd love to see more orbital rail lines. It feels like if you think of Central Station or Town Hall, everything spreads out. It keeps happening. They're building towards Parramatta. They're building out towards the airport. That's a needed line. Of course, I'm not going to be against any more things that we build, but I think everything is so centered in the middle of the city, and that's just not how we live anymore. When I hang out with my friends, I'll go to Burwood, I'll go to Parramatta, I'll go to Strathfield. I don't necessarily always go to the city, and I think that transport doesn't hasn't necessarily caught up to that yet. I think it would be really great if we had, maybe like a Hurstville to Macquarie Park or a Kogarah to Norwest, and the government in their plans I've read, I know that they can see that this is important and they've written it down, but it would be great if it could just happen, if we had better frequencies to support those lines and the orbitals, then I think that connections would be
Hmm.
much better and people would be much more willing to, say, take two trains to get there and do it quicker without having to wait. So I think orbital rail would be a really good addition to transport in Sydney, and it would make it much more appealing for everyone.
Lovely. Thank you, Jethro. Tom and Jacob, very quickly about the magic wand. Then I got one really great question I also would like to cover. I know we are running a bit late, but I think we'll be fine. So, magic wand, Jacob.
Yep. I'll say I think I'm gonna take Jethro's crazy idea
Mhm.
and I'm gonna go with high-speed rail across the East Coast. I think that the connectivity between Australia's major cities is, to put it in a nice way, I think it's pretty disgraceful, to be honest. I think that there could be so much more that we could be doing. We know that other countries are doing it and we can do it too. If you can catch, a 7-hour train from Beijing to Shanghai, why can we not catch a, 5-hour train from Sydney to Melbourne, Canberra to Melbourne, Canberra to Sydney, Sydney to Brisbane? Like it should be so much more integrated, especially on the East Coast. And it's just not. Like the options for traveling between major cities are so expensive a lot of the time, especially from somewhere like Canberra. And I think we could be doing so much more, but I think it's such an it's one of those things, and even Jethro sort of pointed it out, it seems to be so like not like outlandish in a sense that we would consider that we would eventually get to that point. But it's something that's so pivotal and so
Mm.
important that I think needs to be thought about a lot more. So yeah.
Thanks, Jacob. Tom.
Yeah, high speed rail would be great. I took public transport all the way from Melbourne up to Noosa last year, and That was truly a hellish experience. Would not do that again. But it was fun. I think for me, it's not as grandiose, but in some situations, it's just honestly doing the bare minimum, the low-hanging fruit from the get-go, and not having to fight for it afterwards. I'd absolutely love to see that. For example, um, my high school opened in 2019, and it just felt like, even though um, a small, like I'd say a lot of students were either riding or walking to high school. It just felt like they were not facilitated when the school was actually planned from the beginning, and that we had to do a lot of that fighting for better infrastructure retrospectively. And it's like
Hmm.
that was a school that was constructed in 2019, a brand new school, um, part of the Victoria, the education state. And it's like it's the education state, but kids are having to dump their bikes around the schoolyard because we didn't build enough bike loops like to facilitate the number of students that were there. And even just the traffic management out the front of the school was absolutely atrocious. It was basically like dodgem cars of people having to like cram their SUVs down this one tiny street in front of the school to drop people off. And it's just like, I want planners to be thinking, okay, we're building a new school. We want kids to be walking and riding to school. We don't want them to be getting driven to school. How are we going to facilitate this? It's a brand new facility. We have the opportunity to be innovative and be a leader in terms of like encouraging active transport amongst kids, but we're just not doing that to the extent that I want us to. And I think that that's really, really important. Just those small things which enact a behavior change over time, whether that's okay, we get a generation of kids where 15% more are riding to school. And if we get 15% more riding to school, then they're more likely to want better cycling infrastructure as they grow up. They're more likely to push for that and vote for that. And if we instill those behavior changes from a young age, then we're more likely to have people who are like, okay, the infrastructure we have is not good enough. How are we going to
Hmm.
change this? How do we want to push for these changes? So I think that's really important. Just doing small things which over time
Yeah.
enact behavior change and also facilitate that as well. Because we need, if we don't have safe infrastructure, as much as we tell people, okay, you need to ride your bikes, they're not going to. So we need
Yeah.
infrastructure that makes it safe and then also convenient because people at the end of the day often just take the path of least resistance. And if walking or riding is too hard, a lot of people just aren't going to. But if we make it simpler, easier, and safer, then that's really important.
Absolutely. What I'm hearing is public transport shouldn't be just an alternative, but it should be the public transport as well as active transport should be the most desirable, most convenient, and then something that we are invited to do rather than giving an option. Oh, yeah. Great. There are some great questions in the Q&A, but this one is very interesting and it could be our last question perhaps. So what do you do while you are using public transport? I mean, based on my experiences of like traveling with so many students, I kind of know the answer, but I want to hear from you guys. Jacob, how do you use your time when you are on a train or bus or tram?
Yeah, I think try to make this as quick as possible. I think this question feeds into a whole nother question as well, for me personally, which is safety. I think that whilst I would like to be able to get, head deep into schoolwork or whatever it is, um, there's a safety concern in that too, wearing noise cancelling headphones, not being fully aware of your surroundings. And, like in regional Victoria in Ballarat, like within the span of like 2 years, we had a bus that got hijacked, a child that got stabbed at a bus stop, a bus stop that had to get ripped down because it was like a location of crime, non-stop, things like that. Um, you have to be careful of your safety. And so, whilst I would have loved to have used that time productively, I'm now sort of, I think, for lack of better words, almost a little bit traumatized from those experiences where I'm like, I don't want to be unaware of my surroundings in any capacity, which limits what I can actually do while I'm on public transport because I'm too
Mm.
worried about what's happening around me, who's on the bus, who got off the bus. Um, so I think that's a big factor that plays into it too. I think I sometimes
Mm-hmm.
spend a bit too much time worrying about my safety rather than what I could be using that time with otherwise.
That's really interesting, Jacob. Thanks so much for sharing that. How about you, Jethro?
I think that is actually really interesting.
Mm.
Here in Sydney, I generally feel pretty safe on transit.
Mm.
Particularly this holidays and last holidays, like as I'm getting older, like I go out a bit later and I come back later at night. And it's not always the most pleasant experience. They've done this thing recently with the Tangara trains where they closed the back carriage to prevent vandalism. which is not always fun because then that carriage gets quite busy and not particularly my favorite because I don't always feel that safe at night. And funnily enough, the other day I got off the train left, and I look, and there's still kids riding on the back of the train, even though the carriage is closed. Like maybe it's not working. But for me, my time on public transport, I think I'd love to, as Jacob said, I'd love to spend it more productively. I'm in year 11 now, so it'd be great to get some studying done. But most of the time I stand on my commute, so that's not really an option. And
Mm,
I think there's 4 internet dead zones between school and home, maybe more than that. So it doesn't really work out. So generally, I'll just kind of catch up on messages, just look outside, enjoy the train. But I'll point out that's probably the exception. Like everyone around me, I see is on, like you said, on their phone, and my friends and them, they're also just on their phone and just sort of doing that. But I mean, when I get the opportunity, if I'm on like a longer journey or there's better internet connection, I'll sometimes take out my laptop and do some work. But I wouldn't say that's the norm. I think it's mostly just sort of being present on the train because I don't have much other choice.
yeah, all right. Tom, time on public
I oh
transport.
yeah.
Writing your essays, because Ian apparently sees his students writing their essays. Have you done that?
I normally keep my laptop away on the train. I kind of like, yeah, if I need to like get up or move, like just not having my laptop out. Sometimes I'll do like readings or something like that, but I don't remember writing an essay on the train per se. I honestly really enjoy just watching the world go past. I think that when you're not stuck behind the wheel, I know that when I have driven to uni, particularly down Lygon Street at 10 in the morning, it's not exactly the most relaxing and soothing experience. And I honestly find it's just a nice opportunity to kind of relax and like reflect and think about the day coming up. Because
Mm-hmm.
you can close your eyes, you can look out the window, you can listen to music. I'm a bit of a people watcher. I'll watch what's going on around me. I'll look out the windows. I just think it's a nice opportunity to kind of take a break, um, because you're purely just being taken from point A to point B by someone else, and you have basically no responsibility to control the vehicle like you are when you're driving. I think that's a really good opportunity. And I feel like the same thing, yeah, like as I was saying before, extends to when you're riding a bike. So it's just a really nice opportunity to um like see what's going on around you, the community that you live in, how other people are living their lives. And I find that really enjoyable. And I'm often just riding down the bike path and I see like a kid playing on a playground and there's a cafe with people sitting out. I don't know, when you're riding crossing Nicholson Street and you go past the bike shop there and there's the bakery
Mm,
and you're on the inner circle trail. It's just really pleasant and it's a really nice way to relax. And I think that's another reason why cycling and active transport is so
mm,
amazing because it's so good for you. It's transport, but it also benefits you physically, mentally, etc.
mm.
And the same thing with public transport. But ultimately, like my favorite way to get around is on my bike, and it just brings me so much joy to ride through the inner suburbs. It's just so nice. It's so enjoyable. I think that's something that we need to appreciate more.
Oh, thanks so much, Tom. That's a really lovely place to actually wind up because I agree. Like I use public transport all the time and I just can't believe how much I'm enjoying that. And yeah, there's so many things to love about it. Um, Thank you so much, everyone. I really, really appreciate you coming at a very busy time for you all and sharing these wonderful insights. I always get inspired from hearing young people like yourself. So I really, really thank you for your time. So I'll hand it over to Ian now to wrap things up.
Yeah, look, thank you very, very much, everyone. Tom, Jethro, Jacob, and Poppy. As always, these sessions are full of insights and full of things that make me think of all sorts of many, many more questions. Um, and one of the best ones that I just want to leave people with is what Jacob said. Um, two things can exist at the same time. I think, which is a kind of really makes you think, well, actually, that's true. So often in conversations like this, we get caught up in dichotomies. It's got to be either this or either the other thing. It can't be both. But of course, transport is very multiplicitous. We can have many, many things all at the same time, many, many different kinds of benefits. And all of these questions, these really great questions that our audience have asked, have many different answers. So look, I feel very optimistic about the future of transport in Australia, particularly public transport in Australia, after hearing what our panelists have got to say. Thank you to our audience for coming along and being so engaged and asking such great questions. This video, once it's been processed, will be available on the Public Transport Research Committee website, which is part of the Australasian Transport Research Forum. Thank you for your time today. Look forward to the next one.